Cosplay isn't the be-all and end-all when it comes to crafting things for the characters you love, but the items you make don't have to bear their name or image either. All that matters is that it has meaning to you and brings you joy. Astgenne is the character that I started playing Arknights for, so I had to make something special to celebrate her getting an unexpected alternate version. And what better way to carry her with me than to make practical items I can use every day? We'll start with the mug first. It felt like permanent marker mugs were everywhere in the DIY sphere in the 2010s, and while I never actually made one, the concept never left my mind. The idea is that you take a cheap white mug and decorate it using oil-based permanent markers. Allegedly, after baking it, the marker is supposed to bond with the glaze and become a permanent part of the mug. The first problem I ran into was incredibly unexpected, which was that I actually couldn't find a cheap mug in the standard straight-sided cylinder shape. Because the shape was a deal breaker for me, I ended up getting a mug blank for dye sublimation, but I had no idea if the markers were going to bond to it in the end. I originally thought it was going to be incredibly easy to find a mug in that shape, because it's like the quintessential mug shape to me, and used for all of those print-on-demand designs. But in retrospect, it makes sense that I could only find them sublimation ready, because that's how they're printing the mugs. Anyway, thankfully my plan to blend the color out using rubbing alcohol worked, so I could try to emulate the background gradient on the original mug. After a while, I realized you could see the dotted texture of the paper towel I was using, so I switched to an alcohol prep pad, which made a much smoother gradient. Blending it out was an incredibly slow process. The prep pad couldn't be too wet because it would take off too much paint, but it also couldn't be too dry because it would pick up nothing. I dotted on more color where needed and kept on blending. Adding the bird outline was nerve-wracking because I don't have a very steady hand, and it was going to be nearly impossible to fix any mistakes at this stage. I originally tried to apply it using a silicone-tipped tool for more control, but it was extremely time-consuming and the lines didn't look good enough to justify the time cost. The outline is thicker in some places than others, but I think it looks good that way. Because I was going to heat a special coating meant for dye sublimation, it was crucial to work in a well-ventilated area using an oven that won't be used for food. So I used an old toaster oven that is solely for crafts, and I worked outside. Toaster ovens already aren't well insulated, and unfortunately there was a massive temperature drop when I opened the door to put the mug in. It got back up to temperature fairly quickly, so I waited the specified time and hoped for the best. I decided to follow the instructions that came with the mug for dye sublimation, but I really wasn't sure what the best option was, considering I wasn't actually using dye sub inks. I was really afraid that washing it would immediately wash away all of my work, but I was actually really impressed it survived the scrubbing. I'm expecting that this won't hold up long term, but it ended up being a lot more durable than I expected, considering that I wasn't using the right kind of mug. After making this, I actually learned by chance that dye sublimation markers exist, which might have been the perfect thing for this project. For part 2, with Elena's Clipboard, the continuous star design made me think about unlit neon signs, which gave me the idea to try to recreate it by dyeing and shaping an acrylic rod. Sometimes boiling water is hot enough to bend acrylic rods, so I added one to a boiling hot synthetic dye bath and hoped I could soften and tint it simultaneously. The boiling water alone wasn't enough, but the part of the rod that was in contact with the lip of the pan did become malleable enough to bend. Since that wasn't very efficient though, I did switch to a heat gun. Shaping an acrylic rod with a heat gun requires a ton of patience to avoid snapping the rod, which clearly I did not have enough of that day. I continued trying to make this version work even though I wasn't happy with the break and the color difference between the two rods I dyed, but I finally called it quits when my attempts at gluing it together failed. Then it was on to my backup plan, using wire and PVC tubing. I have a ton of 12-gauge steel wire left over from a project a few years ago, and I knew it would be plenty sturdy enough to hold its shape for this. However, this wire is so hard to cut and shape. It was so hard to bend that, yes, I even tried using a bar clamp to make the turn sharper. I started to doubt if this wire was going to work, mostly because of the way the points of the star were turning out, but I wanted to keep trying. I managed to get the shape made as best I could, but when it came to sliding the tubing over the whole thing, that definitely was not going to work. I managed to get it over the first curve, which was already an uphill battle, but I could not get it past the first corner. I thought about slicing the tubing straight down the length of it to easily wrap it around the wire, but thankfully after sleeping on it, I got a much better idea. Cut the wire into different segments and let the tubing itself make the sharp corners. I tied the corners together, hoping to set the shape while it was in the hot dye bath, which did work. All that was left was adding metallic tape details and gluing the whole thing to the clipboard. I actually despise working with hot glue, but I was hoping to avoid a 24-hour cure time from other adhesives purely out of convenience. Can you believe I bought my first hot glue gun only a year or two ago, despite being a crafter my whole life? I can. I ended up peeling most of the hot glue off, sanding down the area, and re-gluing using a solvent-based adhesive off camera. The hot glue wasn't holding super well, but the messy application was what bothered me enough to redo it entirely. I was concerned that the unsupported parts of the star weren't going to lie properly, but it ended up working perfectly after re-gluing. I'm really happy with how it turned out, especially after going through multiple backup plans. And that's it! Elena's mug and clipboard from the art used in her new EP, Stardust on Me. While I especially love recreating outfits and accessories, it was nice to make something practical for this. I really like having items I can use on a regular basis that remind me of all the media I love, and I think it's extra special when it's something only I understand. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Bye!